Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey. Happy Thursday to each of you. And on behalf of FATA, welcome to today's webinar titled Empowering Conversations, Mastering Motivational Interviewing and De-escalation Techniques. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration between the Florida Department of Children and Families and FATA. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to see your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them to all panelists by using the chat panel. The button to open the chat panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. We will answer questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. For computer audio, click the Communicate menu, then click the Audio Connection panel. Click Disconnect, click Communicate menu and Audio Connection again, then click Call in using computer and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password will be posted in the chat panel. Please note you must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a statement of credit. We are unable to verify attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via a computer or the mobile app. Therefore, phone call only attendees are not eligible for a statement of credit or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. A statement of credit and CEUs for up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar. CEUs are available for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Completing the post-webinar evaluation is necessary to receive CEUs or a statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. At the end of today's webinar, you will have 3 opportunities to complete the evaluation. A link I post in the chat, a follow-up email from WebEx, and an automatic web browser pop-up when we end the webinar. To complete the evaluation, you will first need to register or sign into your account. Please ensure that your name and email address match the name and email you used when you registered for today's webinar. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your license or certification number when you register. If you need assistance with account registration, login information, or accessing the evaluation, fill out a contact form on our website or email training@floridabha.org before April 1st, 2025. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure times of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in the professional development section of your FATA account. For licensed practitioners, CEUs will be reported to CE Broker within the same time frame. This presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, Information and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, FATA, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Our presenter today is Laura Holley. Laura is a subject matter expert in stress management and a certified master resilience trainer with the U.S. Army. Currently serving as the Director of Training and Education for the Community Coalition Alliance, Laura has nearly 20 years of experience in prevention and mental health. She holds over 17 certifications in evidence-based curricula, a master's degree in counseling and executive leadership, and is co-host of the podcast The Brain Factor. Laura lives in Orlando with her husband and teenage daughter. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Laura Holley. Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Good morning. Thank you so much. And I am so excited to be here. I was watching as we logged in and as you were talking, Robert, and I was looking at all the welcomes that were popping up in the chat. And I'm very excited about the mix of folks that I was seeing and, say good morning in the chat. I saw clinicians, I saw coalition folks, I saw providers, I even saw corrections, right? And I'm so excited that we have such a diverse group of folks here, because this is a skill that sometimes the name seems like it's this very technical sort of clinical thing, and it's not. And so that's one of the things I'm hoping to really unpack today, that this is, I even saw some folks in the chat that were just like, hey, here's my name and here's where I'm from. So maybe those folks aren't doing provider work or coalition work. Maybe we just have some interested parties on here, some parents, maybe some teachers. And I think this is something that's really going to resonate with folks across that board. And so that's very exciting to me. So we'll break down a little bit about what this is, how we can use it both professionally, personally, and the types of things that this can help with other people, but also what it can do for us. And that's one of the things I want to make sure we're covering today as well. So before I dive into those pieces, I do want to take a minute and let you know about who I work for, because that's why I get to be here. But I work for the Community Coalition Alliance. And if you're not familiar with who we are a coalition of coalitions, so to speak, an aggregate coalition. And we operate with a membership body. And we do that because we are seeking to create a collective voice that is working together towards the health and wellness of all Floridians. We do that with data-driven decision-making, evidence-based strategies, and focusing on those known research-based risk and protective factors. Everything we do is backed by that data and that evidence. We have 4 key roles that we operate within: the membership body, which is that collective voice that I just mentioned. We also are able to navigate providing some funding, some oversight for that funding, some help with that management piece, training and technical assistance, which is stuff like this. And we have a whole training series as well, and offer quite a bit. We are, and I know that you all will get CEUs through FATA today, but on some of our separate trainings, we are also an approved CEU provider. So we're able to do those things for folks. And then the last lane that we sort of operate in is that partnership engagement. Our membership body, it consists of folks, a very diverse group of organizations and communities. Some are large and some are in rural communities where the organization might be a party of one. And when we all come together, we are able to connect in a more meaningful way, in a more efficient way, by leveraging ideas and efforts and resources as one body, as an industry. And so that's a little bit about what we do. There's our value system there on the slide, and you will see that in all of our work. And we are very outcome driven and collaborative, and those are sort of the cornerstones of the things that we are doing. So you'll see that in the way that the content is presented today and the types of things that we are doing. Okay, so what are we going to walk away with today? I want you to walk away today understanding that motivational interviewing is collaborative. It's a person-centered form of guidance. right? We're not doing something to someone. We are imparting a strategy with someone. And so you'll walk away really understanding that piece. You'll be able to explain some of the specific components that go into doing that, right? What is going to elicit and strengthen a person's own motivation for change? How do we motivate someone to motivate themselves? You'll be able to explain that process. And then I want you to learn what those signs of agitation and trauma might be that might give you that signal, that red flag, if you will, that we need to stop what we're doing and employ some de-escalation techniques. And what are those verbal and nonverbal techniques? How do we pull from those? So the when and the how when it comes to de-escalation is going to be the last piece that we cover today. So we've got some lofty goals, but I trust that we'll be able to navigate those together this morning. So how are we going to do that? We're in the introduction now. We're going to talk about a little bit about like what it is, break down what motivational interviewing is, and then there's 4 components of that. So we'll talk about the engagement, the focus, what is evocation, planning, and then we're going to get into de-escalation. Then I've got some resources to share, and we'll have time. We'll have more time for questions and stuff, but also, like Robert said, I don't really have a preference, so pop stuff in the chat as we go. I know that Robert and his team are keeping an eye on that, so I'm okay with being interrupted and can address things in real time if that works better for everybody else. But we'll also have some time at the end if you'd rather just kind of see if maybe your question is covered. Okay, so what is motivational interviewing? What is it, right? I mentioned already that it is collaborative and it's a goal-oriented style of communication that's designed to enhance a person's own desire to change their behavior. So this is a technique that we use to help somebody come to the conclusion that they want to change and become motivated to change, because we can't do that for someone ever, right? And so how do we support, how do we encourage, how do we motivate, right? One of the things that I find for folks who maybe aren't clinical or maybe don't have this type of training normally, or are in jobs where this isn't, like, I know there's some certifications and there's probably folks on this call right now where this is sort of a required CEU that they have to get, motivational interviewing, right? So you get this every year or you seek it out and you kind of already know what it is. But folks that don't fall into that category, I find that the word interviewing can throw people off, right? Like, well, I don't need to gather information from this person. And so that's not really what I do, right? Is sort of that knee-jerk reaction. But I want to point out that the word interviewing is in this title, right? Because it's a question-based conversation technique, not because we are interviewing to get a like list of information to then make a decision, which is what that word interviewing sometimes has that connotation. So I don't want that to confuse anyone's perception of what motivational interviewing is, right? This is a motivational conversation. If that helps you a little bit, think of it that way. The word interviewing truly is only being used because it's question based. We are asking questions to get people to think about what those answers are. Those answers are for them. They're not for us. And you'll see as we unpack how that works, what that really looks like. So I want to make sure that we understand that. So when I talk about the fact that this is applicable to all kinds of situations, let's talk about how, right? So let me ask you guys a couple of questions, and you don't have to answer them, but you could be like, oh my gosh, yes, in the chat or whatever, but just sort of chew on this, right? So have you ever been in a situation where you have experienced frustration when someone didn't follow your advice, right? So that is one of the most frustrating things for me, right? People come to us, or we observe these things and we have this expertise, or we have the mental clarity to see something someone's doing, and we're like, hey, this is your next step, and they're just not following, or they're asking you for your advice. Maybe it's not even unsolicited and they're just not doing it. Oh, right. So that's an incredibly frustrating thing. Or maybe where you get into, you know, and this it probably happens more personally than professionally, but we feel that irritation when we're arguing with somebody about their unhealthy behavior. Like, this is negative coping strategy. This is not helping you. And for us, we see it so clearly, and we're getting opposition to something that so clearly should not be being opposed to. And we just kind of hit that wall. We don't know how to get past that, right? I saw somebody say, yes, absolutely, because you know, we see so clearly what the person is going through, what needs to happen next, right? We have that expertise. And so that's so frustrating, right? Or you find that you're having the same conversation over and over and over again with that same person. And we're just like, how do I get out of this loop, of this circle, of this hamster wheel, if you will? Very, very frustrating, right? Or it sometimes escalates to the point where you just dread having to interact with that person. It's not productive. You leave feeling ineffective, frustrated, and you're not really sure where to go next, right? So when we look at all of these things, right, and I see this is so, I'm seeing words like draining. I'm seeing that pop up in the chat, you know, frustrating, draining, like, are we realizing the theme here? Like, these, when we get stuck in this place where we can't get someone to motivated for change, it impacts us. It hurts us. It creates these emotions and these feelings in us. Not only are we ineffective in helping that person, but we are having all of this impact, you know? And I'm seeing folks share, like, I deal with this daily. Like, you know, like, he should just put in there, like, daily, the population I serve, this is my life and experience right now, right? So these are all situations, and we probably could list 10 more, right? But this underscores the need for motivational interviewing, or for some sort of technique, and this is one of them, that helps us break this cycle and get past these kinds of conversations. Not only is this a skill that truly helps other people, but it can truly help us. Using that, help me put some guardrails in place. Where am I going to operate within those boundaries, right? It helps us avoid, or at the very least delay, that compassion fatigue that so many of us can get in this industry. So, you know, we've heard of all of these things before informally, in the form of best practices, common cliche phrases, and anecdotes, right? But we've heard things like, change comes from within. It has to be their idea. You know, you can't work harder than they do. You can't care more about it than they do. You can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink, right? We hear all of these things, and we know that that's true. But this is a technique that helps support those types of boundaries, right? The value of change as a self-directed initiative, it's widely known, it's widely accepted. Motivational interviewing is a tool that helps someone get there. Okay. I am seeing a bunch in the chat that there's some audio issues. I know that Robert and his team probably saw that and they're jumping on it, but I'm going to take 1 second and see if maybe I have my wrong audio selected on my end. So give me 1 second to see if I can figure that out.
Laura, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? And is this any better? Yes. Okay. I'm seeing yes, yes, yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that. And I apologize for that, So, and continue to let me know if it's not, but I have like 10 options of audio on my side. So I'm still not entirely sure which one's the best. Go with this one today. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So when we talk about the technique of motivational interviewing, there are 4 elements that we're going to focus on. And those elements are engage, focus, evoke, and plan. We're going to break down what those are. We're going to break down what those mean and how we can make sure that we are being all of those parts when we're working, entering these change conversations, right? And trying to get out of that stuck pattern that we can get into. So the engagement step this is a big part. This is where most of our time, that this is where that we have the groundwork. We're still having audio.
Laura, you cut in and out. It sounds very robotic, kind of garbly. And so I think participants are catching like every few words. And it seems like at some points it fixes itself and it goes back to normal and then it kind of cuts again. Might be your internet connection.
We can't hear you right now, Laura.
Here. Can you hear me
Yes. Yes.
here? Okay. Okay. All right. Hopefully it doesn't continue. But this appears to be the right settings. This is all like the mix. This. Okay. So engagement, right? This is a really important piece of what, yeah, sometimes that happens with schools. Okay. So there is a process within the process, right? So we have the 4 components of motivational interviewing. Then we're going to have these 4 components of this particular step, right? Of the engagement piece. Motivational interviewing uses the OARS model to engage with individuals. These are deliberate techniques that help serve as a guide to lead people towards results. Okay? And so what does the OARS model look like? Okay. The O stands for open-ended questions. So we're going to ask open-ended questions. These types of questions allow for exploration of topics. It requires the individual to sort of step out of their established ways of thinking, challenges rehearsed responses, right? Those patterns of responding that we can get into. And it allows people to begin to draw their own conclusions. Encourage the use of what questions, right? What has led you to believe this? What is the reason for blah, blah, blah versus why? It creates more reflection when we use what questions and less defensive. More examples of open-ended questions are, how can I help you with blank? Help me understand this. How would you like things to be different? What are the good things about blank and what are the less good things? When would you be most likely to blank? What do you think you would lose if you gave up this behavior or this habit or whatever? What have you tried before to make a change? And what do you want to see happen next? These are all examples of how we can hit those open-ended questions, what those sound like. You'll notice that none of those were yes and no questions. All of those are designed to give you more information. All of those have the potential to help people feel seen and heard with their answers. And examples of that, there's an example on the slide. It's asking someone like, well, how does marijuana fit into your life, right? What are the reasons that you're considering cutting back? Instead of just like, that's a great idea, you should do that. We're going, okay, like let's really put some substance behind this. So that's what the O stands for. The A stands for affirmation, right? So the A in the A process is affirmations. These are statements and gestures that recognize the client's strength, individual's strength, and acknowledges behaviors that lead in the direction of positive change, no matter how big, no matter how small. So, you know, we're praising positive ideas and behaviors. We're expressing appreciation for efforts. Affirmations build one's ability to change. And to be effective, affirmations have to be genuine, have to be congruent. So examples of affirming responses. I appreciate that you were willing to meet with me today. Sometimes that's the only good thing that happened, right? Let's be honest. Sometimes early on in the change process, just showing up in the conversation is a step, right? You're clearly a very resourceful person. That's a nice you handled yourself really well in that situation. That's a good suggestion. Honestly, if I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could have managed so well. And I've really enjoyed talking to you today. These are all things that, depending on the situation, can be sincere. They can be true. We could also have a whole lot of things happening that aren't working, and those things could still be true. So we want to find those affirming responses to highlight, acknowledge the behaviors, no matter how big or small, that are moving us in that direction that we ultimately the R stands for reflecting. Here is where we are reflecting back. It's reflective listening is a primary skill in outreach, right? It's the pathway for engaging others in relationships, building trust, fostering that motivation for change. It appears easy. It really does. Like, I'm just repeating what the person says, but it takes hard work and skill to do this. Sometimes the skills we use in working with clients don't exemplify reflective listening, but instead they serve as roadblocks in effective communication. And examples are misinterpreting what's said, assuming what a person needs. We come into these conversations with expertise. Sometimes that expertise is a barrier because we have to dial it back. We're doing something like reflective listening. It's vital to learn to think reflectively. It's a way of thinking that accompanies good reflective listening, right? It includes an interest in what the person has to say, respect for the person's inner wisdom. Listening breakdowns occur in three places, right? Breakdowns occur when the speaker doesn't say what is meant, the listener doesn't hear it correctly, or the listener gives a different interpretation of what. So reflective listening is meant to close the loop in communication to ensure that breakdowns don't occur, right? And it allows for greater exploration, right? Some people find it helpful to use the standard phrases like, so you feel this, it sounds like this, you're wondering if, right? So we reflect back how we understood. There are three basic levels of reflective listening that may deepen or increase the intimacy and thereby change the effective tone of an interaction. So in general, the depth should match the situation. Examples of those three levels are repeating or rephrasing, right? So we're going to repeat and substitute synonyms or phrases and stay very close to what's said. We can also paraphrase. The listener makes a restatement in which the speaker's meaning is inferred, right? And then a reflection of feeling. We're picking up on those emotions, saying them as a way of reflective listening. Emphasize the emotional aspect of the speaker's communication through those feeling statements. That's the deepest form of listening. When we hear what they are feeling and we reflect. If we're picking up on a strong emotion, that's an important thing we're going to want to do. Also want to make sure we're not misreading. So if it's like you feels like you feel angry about that. No, I'm not angry, right? So that's a way in which we can avoid that miscommunication. Or yes, this does make me angry. Thank you, right? Then we feel seen and heard. So that's a really form of reflective listening. Varying the levels of reflection is really effective in listening. And at times there are benefits to either overstating or understating a reflection on purpose, right? So an overstated reflection may cause a person to back away from their position. And an understated reflection may help a person explore a deeper commitment to that position, right? We get into that more when we talk about focusing. So we're going to revisit that because the motivational interviewing step of focusing is all about sort of narrowing in on those specific complex reflections. Right? But for this stage of engagement, right, we want to talk about those complex double-sided, right? That's a good reflection where we say things like, on the one hand, you want this, on the other hand, you see this, right? Okay. On the one hand, you want to adhere to your probation requirements. On the other hand, you have a hard time keeping up with everything. We're reflecting back that duality. There's also affect. You're frustrated and you don't know how to move forward. That's a reflection of affect. You can amplify. You can't imagine a day you can ever see a benefit of cutting down on critic. That's an amplified response. A minimized response is something like, you feel like you've only had minor difficulties. And then we also can use metaphor or simile as a reflection. Being sober all day would feel like torture for you. Like that's reflecting and summarizing what they're saying using a metaphor or simile. And then action, we can do an action reflection. Something like, it seems like it would be easier not to use if you weren't around other people who are. Okay, so that's that action. Sounds like you're wondering if. So we're seeing those reflection. And then finally, the S in ORS is summaries, right? And summaries are different than reflection. They're a special application of reflective listening, so they share some components, but they're designed for transition points, right? For example, after the person has spoken about a particular topic, has recounted a personal experience, or when the encounter is nearing its end, right? Summarizing helps ensure that there's a clear connection between the speaker and the listener, and it can provide a stepping stone towards change or the next step. Sort of like, okay, we're going to put a pin in this, and then we're going to move here. Right? And that's how a summary is different than the reflection that's occurring throughout the exploration of that piece of topic. The summary is sort of designed to wrap it up and go on to the next. Right? So the structure of summaries are beginning with a statement that indicates you are making a summary. For example, okay, let me see if I understand so far. Okay, here's what I've heard. Tell me if I'm missing anything. That's another statement, right? We're going to give special attention to change statements at this step, right? These are statements made by the client that point towards a willingness for change, okay? And there's 4 types of change statements. And they all overlap pretty significantly, but we're listening for a problem recognition. My use has gotten a little out of hand at times, right? Concern is the other thing we're looking for. If I don't stop, something bad is going to happen. We're looking for intent. I'm going to do something, I just don't know what it is yet, or I don't know how. And then optimism. I know that I can get a handle on this problem. So those are the 4 types of change statements that we're looking for to include in our sentence, right? If the person expresses ambivalence, it's useful to include both sides in the summary statement, the same way we had that duality in that reflection, right? On the one hand, on the other hand, include that in that summary, right? And it can be useful to include information in those summary statements from other sources, like your own clinical knowledge, research, courts, family, right? Be concise and then end with an invitation. That invitation is something like, did I miss anything? Is that accurate? Are there any other points that I should, right? Or you should be considering anything you want to add or correct. And then depending on the response of the person to your summary statement, it may lead naturally to like planning or taking concrete steps towards the change goal, or simply moving on to the next piece of the conversation. This is a transition. It's putting a pin in it and saying, okay, here's where we are. So now let's move on. And move on can look all kinds of so that's the ORs. We'll revisit this a little bit. We'll see how it interacts and overlaps with the other steps. But this is that engagement piece. This is what the structure of those conversations. Okay. So let's practice this for a minute, right? Okay. So when we are looking at, and so get ready to put in the chat, right? So remember that the goal is to understand and not to solve, right? This is not meant to be a difficult or challenging example. It's just one that has material that we can explore in. So here is a hypothetical example. Somebody you're speaking to tells you this. I'm going to read it. And while I'm reading it, I want you to put in the chat. You don't have to answer all of these, but put in either like a reflection you might offer, something in here you could reflect back on. What does that sound like? Something in here you could affirm, and what does that sound like? Maybe an open-ended ask or any summary, right? So I'll read it, but if there's any one of those, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, or summaries, go ahead and right, So somebody says to you, I've been feeling unhappy lately in my relationship. I've been with my husband for 15 years and I love him, but I don't know if I'm in love with him anymore. He's a wonderful father and I don't think I want a separation or anything because I don't want to do that to my children. Not like he's an awful husband either. I'm just not happy. I'm only 43 years old. I'm not ready to give up and be unhappy for the rest of my life. And if things stay the way they are right now, this is what my future looks like. I feel so stupid because I have a good life and I wish I could just get over it and learn how to be, right? So what are some things following that ORS model we could say? Oh, that's nice. What was your relationship like when you were happy, right? Um, what was your relationship like when you were happy? I'm trying to find if there's any other ones in here. What do you feel will make you happy, right? Why have you been feeling unhappy, right? We want to stay away from a little the why questions, but I love that you followed that up with what has changed, right? What has changed? I love that, right? It sounds like you are trying to figure out what might make you happy right now. Excellent reflection, right? It sounds like this is what I'm hearing, right? What are some things we could affirm, right? My chat keeps jumping up and down. Oh, here's good. Yeah, there we go. There's an affirmation. Oh, I lost it, but it was something like it's sounds like you're figuring out what trying to make it. You love your husband, he's a great father, but there are some areas of your life, areas in your relationship that are unsatisfying. That keeps bouncing for me. But I get the idea. I'm satisfied. There it is. You are scared of what will happen, right? That's great, right? Even to affirm like you know, it's you know, I'm impressed that you're considering your children. That's a nice affirmation, right? And then we have some duality there. On the one hand, you recognize that you have a good life. On the other hand, it feels unfair, right? So we're reflecting that duality plus that sort of emotional. So that's great. You guys did a really nice job with that, right? I'm seeing tons of what questions in there. I'm seeing it sounds like, right? So you picked up on those key moments really, really well. Okay. So let's move on to focus, the next step of the 4 in that motivational interviewing. And this is that ongoing process of seeking and maintaining direction. We're going to continue to go in the direction to get to the core of the issue to help get to the place where we motivate that change. So what has to happen in order to focus, right? We're probably ambivalent if we need to focus. We're sitting on the fence. We've got all this information. We just saw that in the last example. On the one hand, there's this. On the other hand, there's this. I feel stupid. I don't know. Here's the collection of all of the things that are knocking around in my head, and I don't know what all of it means or where I want to go with it, but I know something. That's what we heard from that person. Now, most people are uncomfortable when someone is sitting on the fence, right? They want to push them to one side or the other. We see the side they're supposed to be on, right? We just want to go over here and then we can talk, right? But it's much more effective if we just simply make that fence incredibly uncomfortable. They'll choose to get off of it themselves, right? So the active motivational interviewing, even just the part we've covered so far, is this respectful and gentle way of making the fence uncomfortable and making ambivalence prickly, right? And so we're asking them to explore what they're experiencing and to look clearly and honestly about what they're thinking and feeling. We're laying out those inconsistencies, those contradictions. We're not allowing the avoidance and the familiar distraction that conflict often provides. So here's where we're going to revisit those reflections. That helps us talk more about those complex reflections. And there are 7 that we're going to unpack, and that's that direct reflection, double-sided, and affect, amplified, minimized, comparison, and action. Touched on those a little, but that's where focus is. Okay, so a directive reflection. Let's talk about what that looks like. Okay, what you choose to reflect has a big impact. So think and choose carefully what it is you want to zero in. What you choose to reflect on will guide the conversation and improve your effect, right? So let's say the individual says, it's been fun, but I guess I can't go on like this anymore, right? Direct reflection is, okay, you've enjoyed yourself up to this point. You're worried about what might happen if things keep going on. really time for a change. That's direct to the point. It is a reflection of what you're hearing them say, but it's a little stronger, right? And it's definitive. So we want that directness. Okay. A double-sided reflection, that acknowledges and validates the contradictory thoughts. When we do this, we increase the person's awareness of the discomfort of the fence, right? Double-sided reflection. If somebody says, I know that I don't have a current prescription for pain medication, but I had some left over and I'm in pain, right? Okay, right? On the one hand, you want to manage your pain better. And on the other hand, you haven't figured out how to do that without pain medication, right? You notice that highlights that duality. Part of you knows you're not allowed to take your old medication. Then there's another part of you that just doesn't care. That helps make that fence feel new, right? And then we have affect reflection. And these types of reflections emphasize beliefs, values, they highlight emotional dimensions, and it helps to display the impact and importance while validating feelings as true barriers, right? Because it's not, the feelings are true barriers. How this person feels is getting in the way of their motivation and their ability to allow themselves to change, not their ability to change. Everybody has that. It's their ability to allow themselves to change, make that decision, right? So let's take the same example. I know I don't have a current prescription, but I have some and I'm in pain, right? So we're seeing that justification. But affect reflection is something like, you're desperate to manage your pain better, right? You're confused as to why this is a problem. And so that emphasizes that belief, that value, right? And we see that we've highlighted the, we've used the word confused because they've said like, I know I don't have it, but it was given to me for pain and I'm in pain, right? So there is that underlying, like, why is this a problem? We're highlighting that. We're going, okay, so here's what I'm hearing you say, right? And making, again, those things uncomfortable, right? So amplify. What if we wanted to amplify it as a strategy? This technique, we exaggerate what the individual is saying without sarcasm, y'all. That's important, right? We want to make sure that it's amplified just enough where we're selling that we might actually believe that, but we're not making fun or coming across as sarcastic. But we are doing that because we are hoping that it makes the person retreat and back off a little bit when it comes to that justification talk. So the same example, I don't have this prescription. However, I had one. It was for pain. I'm feeling pain, right? That's what we're hearing them say. So what does the amplification looks like? Your pain feels completely debilitating without else. So maybe we're hearing, like, maybe we'll hear like, well, no, I mean, I didn't say that, right? It's not totally debilitating, right? So it's designed to get them to back off, or it's impossible to manage pain without, right? So we're amplifying that, get them to retreat it. Okay. So the next one is minimizing, right? That's the opposite, right? We're going to downplay the concern. We're going to, the truth that was acknowledged but buried it in sustaining language. Again, right? It's really important to avoid sarcasm. And this technique can stimulate stronger acknowledgement of the person of the need for change. Help them go back and overstate why this behavior is bad, right? Because if you're minimizing, they're going to go, well, no, it's not that easy because I know that this is bad, right? So here's another example. I don't understand why I can't drink, right? My problem was cocaine, not alcohol. I work hard all week. I want to relax on the weekends. I want to drink a few beers. What's the big deal, right? So a way that we can minimize in the reflection is, from your perspective, alcohol doesn't seem like that big of a deal to you, right? Or you can't imagine why we would recommend not drinking. That's who listed a risk. It's like, well, no, I mean, I get it. I know why. I understand, right? So now it has them sort of double down on that part of the duality that going to design forms. Compare it increases an understanding and inspires correction, just like the minimizing and the amplifying, anything that can get the person to go, well, wait a second, and to either add something else or correct something that they said, right? So here's that same example of why can't I have a couple of beers, right? Okay, well, alcohol feels like the only vacation you've had, right? So we're sharing that. You work like a college student, work hard, play harder, right? So we're making those comparisons there with metaphors. Okay. And then an action reflection that stimulates thoughts and plans for change. It can provide direction and elicit some deeper topic exploration. Right?
Laura,
What do I mean by that? Here's this same example. Why can't I drink? What's the big deal? Right? You're looking for new ways to relax.
Laura, we're having a hard time hearing you again.
Now we're introducing the idea that this might not be the only way. Right? We're validating, like, yeah, you work hard. You deserve to relax on the week. Your team needs a change. Yes. Yes, Robert, I hear you. I can't hear you. All I have is change. Any better? I'm not sure what to do here, Robert, because all of my stuff is I'm hardwired, and it's all of my audio settings have not changed.
Laura, you may be able to turn off your camera. That may give a little bit more bandwidth, but it's maybe an incident on WebEx's side. I'm not sure, since we do have quite a few people on.
Okay, let's try that. So
And it just comes and goes, so it looks like it may be on WebEx.
okay, all right. Am I okay right now, or?
Yeah, you sound great right now. It just comes and goes.
Okay, all right. We'll just jump in if it starts going again. Hopefully, turning the camera off helps a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so that action reflection is stimulating those thoughts and plans for change, right? So this acknowledges the validity of what the person is experiencing as the problem, but starts to get them to think that there might be more than one way to solve that problem, right? Or you're hoping to decrease your stress at. We're seeing something a little bit deeper that they might be saying. So we're going to reflect that back in an action. Moving on to that next piece, that third piece of motivational interviewing, and that's avocation, right? This is the process intended to help remove that ambivalence and move towards change. This is where it starts to come together, where we're going to see that person say, I need to make a change, right? We're hoping in this place we shift, okay? So how do we get them from there? We've engaged, we've narrowed the focus, we've used all of these techniques, and now we're going to evoke that, okay? So here's the underlying theory of motivational, right? This is that people are ambivalent about making changes. When we advocate for change, it will evoke resistance from the other person, and resistance predicts lack of change. Getting the other person to talk about making the change makes it much more likely that they will do, right? So that's where we have to stop short. If we start advocating for change, we are no longer practicing this technique. And we know that there's sustainability in change when it comes from within. So this step is where the rubber meets the road, and we have to be very careful that we are guiding that person towards advocating for their own change. How do we do that? One of the really great techniques there is this staging, right? Asking this question after we've done our summaries and our reflections and our open-ended questions and our listening, and we've moved on through this process. We've reflected back. We've used all of the complex techniques of reflection that we talked about. Now we go, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, we can talk about change. We just can't say things like you need to make a change, right? So we can say, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is making this change to you? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can make this change if you decided what you wanted to do, right? If you made this decision, do you think you could do it? On a scale of 1 to 10, where are you, right? And how important is it, right? And then when they choose a number, start to ask them questions that help them see that they're in a better place than they think, and also that there are things that have already happened that show that they can get closer to 10, right? So, why'd you choose a 5, not a 3? So ask them to reflect on what went into them choosing that number that they gave, right? What would it take to go from a 1 to a 3? What would it take to move you from a 5 to a 6, right? What would have had to have been different for you to tell me you're at 7, right? And just get them to consider what they would need to take that next groove along that stage. And we're going to start listening at this point for change talk, right? We're going to start listening for that change talk. And what does that change talk look like? It sounds like a desire to change. Those are statements like, I wish I could be a better mom to my kids. I don't want to relapse. I'm looking forward to that life of recovery, right? That's that desire. We're also going to listen for change talk that says ability. I've done this, right? This sounds like something I can do. I did this on my own for 3 years. I made all my appointments before now. We're also going to listen for people saying their reasons for change, right? I'm scared of this. I'm going to lose my job. I'm sick of people feeling this way about me. We're going to listen for talk that points to a need for change. I need to quit. I don't have other options. I guess I have to do something about this, right? That's how that sounds. We're going to listen for commitment type of change. I've made a decision. I'm going to go to treatment. I promised this person I'm going to do this, right? I set a quit date, right? We're going to listen for activation change talk. And these are the best ones. Activation, taking steps. We're in a good place if we're hearing things like, I'm willing. I'm finally ready. I guess it's time, right? I'm going to talk to my therapist. I'm looking for treatment centers that have open. I picked out a couple of people I would ask to be my sponsor, right? Those are action and steps. And that's really good change talk. When we hear change talk, we want to respond to it, okay? We want to go ahead and revisit ORs very specific to the change talk, right? Using the intentional motivational interviewing technique. So now we're the first time we used ORs in the beginning to engage, that was broader. Now we've heard that change talk. Excellent. We're at a better place. We're going to focus in on that change talk, and we're going to do ORs again. And what does that sound like, right? How, in what ways, right? Why? Well, be careful with the why, but after we've said how and what, right, we can say that, like what, how did you get here? What made you get here? And I think that's excellent, right? So we want to respond using those techniques, ask those open-ended. We want to express agreement and encouragement, right? That's that affirmation, okay? And then we want to reflect using those simple or complex reflections. We want to reflect that change talk that we are using, right? And then my favorite piece of this is what the summary sounds like and looks like when we are revisiting ORs specifically in response to change talk, okay? I love this phrase, like present the person with a change talk bouquet, right? Because change talk is buried in a lot of negative fear statements. Those are the weeds that are overpowering the garden. So find it, collect it, grab it up in a bouquet, and hand it all back to them. They have said 10 things that are positive change talk and 30 things that are weeds, that are fear statements. Grab up all the change talk and put it right back at them, right? Summarize it and say, here's what I heard, and leave all the fear statements out of it. It's a very powerful technique, that change bouquet, right? You said these things. You feel these things. I heard you. This is what you said in this conversation. This is what you believe, right? And highlight them. Then we can move on to the last piece of motivational interviewing, which is planning. And this is the process of being with someone while they form a change plan that will work. This is not forming the change plan for them or any of that. Okay, so let's talk about when we're helping somebody choose their goals. Right? So we need to look at that change, that cycle of change, right? What that looks like. We look towards the bottom there on that graph. We're looking at pre-contemplation. right? This is when somebody's not necessarily like thinking about change. This is where they're focused on the positive aspects of their substance use, like what it provides them and what it does, as an example. They're unlikely to have any concerns about what they're doing. They may show resistance in even talking about it. And they're unlikely to know or accept that this is even problematic or risky. They're unlikely to respond to direct advice to change their behavior, but they may be receptive about the information, about the risks associated with their specific level and pattern of behavior. And sometimes, in the substance misuse world, sometimes this stage is described as happily using, right? But then we can go into contemplation, and we saw any little piece here, the open door, that they might be open and receptive to hearing the information about the risks. So that could lead us to contemplate. Okay. And this is all important, these stages, because this is how we're going to choose what our goals are for the conference. Somebody is in pre-contemplation, our goal is going to be very different than in imparting motivational interviewing than it's going to be if they're in action. We want to make sure that our goal for the interaction is based on where they are in the stage. Because we don't ever want to waste time throwing suggestions at people who aren't ready to hear them. And we want to build motivation. So number one, next time they may accept your guidance, and also we can help move them through this change, right? When we get into contemplation, this is where somebody is thinking about change, harm reduction or change, some sort of change. They might still have some ambivalence. They're going to be able to be on the fence. They might see both sides, the good things and the not so good things. They're seeing both of those. They likely have some awareness of the problem associated with their behavior, and they may be at this point doing the pros and cons, like weighing up the advantages and disadvantages of their current pattern behavior. They're going to be likely to listen and respond to information about those risks. They might be open to hearing some harm reduction, some suggestions about small change that has worked for people in their situation, and generally speaking, open for discussion or of those open-ended questions, thinking about it and talking about it. Right. And then we might move from contemplation after we've had some of those conversations into preparation. And this is where the intent to take action becomes present. Now they might vocalize that intention to others, may start to make some small changes, might be reevaluating that behavior, considering what different behavior could offer them and what it might look like. You'll see the person becoming more confident, more ready for change, and they might be starting to talk about and considering what some of those options are. In an ideal world in preparation, there's an actual preparation going on. We might be setting dates of when they're going to actually implement their plan to change. We might be determining what those strategies are to make change, and we might be gathering information from a variety of sources. Internet, health professionals, family, right? Then we're going into action. This is where decisions are made. They've started making changes, actively doing something about their behavior. If it's substance misuse, maybe they've cut down or stopped completely. And they're still likely, though, to feel somewhat ambivalent about the substance use or the issue, and needing encouragement and support to maintain their decision. Where affirmations are really important here. Okay. And then we move on to maintenance, right? This is where we see the person attempting to maintain the changes they've made. They're working to prevent going backwards. They're focusing their attention on high-risk situations and the strategies for managing these. And they're best equipped at this stage when they develop strategies for avoiding situations where they are at risk of falling into old patterns of behavior. And they're much more likely to remain in maintenance and abstinence if they're receiving some sort of benefit, reward, support, affirmation, and you have the power to help provide, right? And then we may go to a stable lifestyle, or we may relapse and go back into that curve, in which case we come back in with, okay. So that's a little bit about what that looks like. But the important piece there is we need to assess where that person is in the change curve, in the change wheel, because our goals for that interaction are going to be knowing where they are. Okay. And when we are throughout the motivational interviewing encounter, we are using the EPE strategy, which is elicit, provide, elicit. It can be particularly useful when offering advice or because we have to be careful in motivational interviewing. When we have the invitation and the open door, we can offer suggestions or advice. It's not the primary type of talk we have in motivational interviewing. So when that open door is there, and we've decided to do that, we need to make sure we are following a strategy that is compatible with motivational. And so EPE helps with that, right? We're going to elicit information, ideas, opinion, feedback from the individual. Then we're going to provide our own information, ideas, opinions, and feedback to the person. And then we're going to elicit their ideas, opinions, and feedback in return, right? So we're burying ours. But what we see is, in between there, what we're seeing is everyone in this conversation is providing the same thing and has the same ability. So this is where it feels collaborative versus, great, you've had all this time to talk to me about your problem, and now I'm going to tell you what's right. No, that's not motivational interview. Collaborating on, what do you think? What's your feedback? Here are some of my thoughts. What are your thoughts on that? That's more collaborative. That's where we want to be. So what does it look like, right? Asking an open-ended question, providing a reflection that has your information, ideas, opinion, and feedback in there, and then asking another open-ended. We're still utilizing those motivational interviewing techniques to do that, okay? Ask permission, offer advice, ask feedback, right? That's another way that we see that happening, right? And then we need to be checking our approach, right? Check your approach. If you meet with resistance, it's up to you to address your approach and adjust troubleshooting in those areas. Make sure that you are listening versus lecturing. There's a difference. And we all run that risk. So do a self-check and say, am I talking at this person or am I talking with this person, right? So troubleshoot that. Express empathy versus accusation. Make sure that there is a fair amount of empathy in what you are doing, okay? And what you are saying. Be sure that you're focusing on the benefits of change versus the consequences of not changing. Make sure we're not falling too much into the negative, the consequence-based stuff, right? A lot of that stuff is true, and it's very easy to go there to say, well, this, and then it's all like, versus simply changing that perspective and saying, here's all the good things, that benefits of change, positive things that are going to, right? We want to make sure we're focusing. So if you're meeting with a whole lot of resistance, check your approach in these three very specific. Okay? And we want to make sure that we're doing that. Now we're going to roll with resistance a little bit, right? If we're continuing to get resistance, there's some reflections that can really help with that. We can have a simple reflection, and that's just simply acknowledging the individual's point of view. Just acknowledge that this is what this feels like for you, your concerns. We can amplify, right? Reflecting back what the individual has said, that doubling down on it, right? Okay, they really want to, stick with this point, dig their heels on. Let's make it bigger and see if that causes them to back off a little bit. I didn't say that, right? But we want to make sure we're doing it without sarcasm. Double-sided reflection. This is where we're acknowledging both sides of the individual's ambivalence, pulling together information the individual has offered throughout the conversation. Now, I heard you say this, and I heard you say that. Those two things contradict, right? And then we can shift focus. We can shift the individual's attention away from the issue that you're stuck on and move on to something else that has to do with greater conversation. Reframing is another good technique to roll with resistance, and that is acknowledging the validity of the individual's perspective and observations, but offering a new meaning and interpretation. Hey, I get it. This makes sense. I hear what you're saying. I understand why you would feel that way. What you're describing to me makes sense, but have you considered other things that your frustration? Have you considered what else might, that's where we're now offering, like, maybe this feeling is valid, but maybe it's coming from a different place, right? And then we want to emphasize personal control. Communicate to the individual that it is their decision. At the end of the day, this is up to you, right? We can say things like that, right? It's their decision. You can make this decision, but you also, can make a decision not to. But and we're talking out again those positive benefits of change, asking those open-ended questions, giving those reflections, but really emphasizing that they do have personal control in all. And that's how we roll with that resistance. Okay. Now, sometimes resistance adds to. Sometimes in resistance, we start to see behavior escalate. And this doesn't just happen in motivational interviewing, but this is a nice companion as we move into our next session today, which is de-escalation. Next session. I want to talk to you about, right? But this can show up when we're having difficult conversations and change conversations. If let's say we're doing amplifying and now we have anger, right? Or we didn't really check our approach and now we've hit a nerve, right? So sometimes this can happen when we are having these difficult conversations with folks, and sometimes this can happen in a whole lot of different. Right? But when someone is escalated, it's really important that we know and pull from actual techniques that are backed by science and research and evidence that we know, and get to a place, right? So what is de-escalation, right? One of the big things I want you to remember when we find ourselves in a situation where everything else has stopped. There's no more techniques. We're not using any more conversation techniques. We're not trying to get anything out of the conversation anymore. We've gotten a red flag and we are going to hit the pause button because our only goal here right now is to de-escalate the situation, calm it down. What I want you to understand is that calm is contagious. Panic is contagious. Your behavior, your demeanor is going to serve as a guide and almost a mirror in these. So very often when someone is escalated, they're going to match energy. So to de-escalate, we have to meet that that escalation with calmness. That's a really important thing that you're going to see sort of woven throughout everything that we're. So de-escalation is the act of using a non-physical skill set to reduce anger, fear, stress, anxiety, and agitation in another person. There's a really important word in there, and that's fear. Fear is so often the basis of escalation. When people are afraid, whether it's afraid of a consequence, of an action, of facing something, afraid of their own emotions, right? Fear causes people to escalate. Other things do too, but fear is a very common one. So I think if we keep that in our minds, it becomes easier to understand the behavior because empathy can live there, right? And we want to make sure that we are bringing empathy to the team. The other thing I really want you to remember is that behavior is communication. This person who is escalating is communicating, just not well. But it is a form of communication, and we do have to try to interpret it. We do have to try to respond. The responsibility lies with us in the de-escalation process. So in motivational interviewing, we're seeking collaboration, and the responsibility lies with that. We're helping to guide them to make change. In de-escalation, we are responsible for that process. That person is not in a position to be responsible for de-escalating themselves. Now, a lot of times I talked about fear, said stress, right? Trauma shows up different ways for different people. Sometimes trauma shows up with anger. That's negative tones and rudeness. We see silence often with trauma. People shut down, right? A reluctance to speak, resistance, right? we see selective memory, intentional forgetfulness, and frustration. So it's important for us to know what it is that we are looking at. Okay? That's an important thing because it shows up really differently for people. People are triggered. We're going to get all kinds of different. The other thing that I want you to remember, this might be on a future slide, but it popped into my head now, and I don't want to let it go in case I didn't put it on a slide. But aggression is not the same thing as violence. And so I really want us to keep that in mind, that aggression is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable for us to be exposed to have to navigate, even if you're really good at it, even if you're used to it, right? It doesn't really get easier or feel more comfortable. You just get better at it. But one of the things that can really help is building your awareness that aggression is communication and it's not the same thing as violence. And so we have to really be careful about where that line is. And also cross-culturally, what is aggressive in one culture might be different than what is aggressive in another. We really want to look at that. And that goes back to, again, the overall point here on this slide that behavior is communication. So the more that we can identify what communication, what they're trying to communicate, that's going to really help us. Okay, that's going to absolutely help us. Okay, behavior intensity, right? So let's look at behavior intensity. It's really important to recognize that an individual's behavior can change very fast. Oftentimes it can catch us off guard. This speaks to what I was just saying about how uncomfortable this can be. You really don't have any clue what might trigger someone until they are triggered. So you do have to be prepared. This graph here, this is based on a model in a school setting that was used with educators and students, but I liked it and wanted to include it here because it's still very applicable to how conversations might go in any context, right? So we're calm, we're talking, everything seems okay. Now there's been a trigger. We may or may not even be aware that there's a trigger that happened. Now we see agitation and we see acceleration and then the peak of the. When we are there, we are employing de-acceleration, de-escalation techniques. We are bringing that person down, and we are then in behavior recovery at that point, back to okay. And so I think that what this graph does is, we see where productive conversations are going to take place in that calm below that trigger. The very small part of the graph here where we're going to have any kind of productive conversations. So any other place in this graph, don't try to have one. Any other place in this graph, the only goal is that de-escalate. And so I think that that's a really important thing for us to remember, right? So signs of agitation. What does agitation look like? How can we tell what's that red flag that maybe we've hit a trigger, right? So we're having this conversation. Things seem to be going okay, uncomfortable, but okay. And then we start to see rapid speech. We start to see fidgeting. Maybe voices are getting a little louder. Maybe the pitch is going up. That's something to look for. Physicality like shaking or erratic movements, right? Somebody starts gesturing or balling up their fists when we see like tension in their behavior. Wild gesturing, right? Pacing, and then some of that aggressive posture or aggressive language. When we start to see those things change, we want to make sure that we then shift our focus to de-escalate. Right? There are two key concepts to remember. One is that reasoning isn't possible. Reasoning with an angry, it's kind of like telling somebody to calm down. Telling someone to calm down has never in the history of calming down caused anyone to actually calm down, right? It's not how that works, and we know that. So let's stop also reasoning with people who are getting or so reasoning with an angry, upset, or highly anxious person is not possible. The first and only objective in de-escalation is to reduce the level of agitation so that discussion then becomes possible again. It's not to reason with somebody or to discuss, just to bring it down. And that's really important, because that second concept is that this is a counterintuitive process. De-escalation techniques are inherently abnormal. They go against our own natural fight or flight reflexes, right? To be effective, we have to remain common centered. We have to be detached. Therefore, these skills require practice to become useful. We have to practice. We have to know what they are. They have to be intentional. We are immediately going to try to reason, and we know that that is not possible. Somebody is okay. So what are those things, right? One of the things that I want to point out is that 80 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal. 80 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal. That's a gigantic number, particularly, and I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but particularly when so much of look at us right now, because of the audio issues and because of the nature of this platform, which is great. And as a result, we have 400 people that can have this conversation together today, but you can't see me and I can't see you. We don't have our nonverbal communication. And so much of our world, I can't see you and you can't see me, right? And so when we know that 80 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal, that's powerful. It's very important to be able to identify exactly what we are communicating to others non-verbally when we can see each other. You might be trying to de-escalate the situation by talking to the other person, and you might be saying everything right, but your body language might be showing a willingness to like get physical, right? So maybe you look aggressive back, okay? When people are angry, they sometimes do not listen, and I'm using air quotes, right, to the words that are being said, because there's a difference between hearing and listening. Often they see and react to what you are saying with your body language, not what you are saying with your words. So there's an argument here that the nonverbal communication piece of de-escalation is far more important than any words that might be coming out. So you always have to be careful about the messages that you are sending without words. Be mindful of your face, your body, and your voice, right? We've got to appear calm and self-assured. We want to maintain appropriate eye contact. That can be limited eye contact, right? We want to look. We don't want to stare down the agitated person. We can occasionally look away. That is okay. We want to maintain a neutral facial expression. If you have one of those faces that doesn't lie, I get it, but you got to work on that a little bit. I know we've heard the phrase "fix your face," right? So make sure you fix your face, and maintain an alert posture, right? That tells us we're in it, we're here. I'm confident, I've got you, right? But I'm neutralizing everything else. We want to keep our hands visible, but to ourselves, right? And we want to speak clearly. That's important, right? So let's take a look at the eyes, right? Specifically, we want to make sure we know what messages we are sending with the different parts of our nonverbal. We want to and we're going to break this down to real small pieces. Let's look at our eyebrows, right? You see a couple of images in the background of that slide, but let's look at our eyebrows. One eyebrow raised sends the message of sternness. Eyes wide open sends the message of surprise. A hard stare is a threatening gesture. If we close our eyes longer than the normal blink, it sends the message, I'm not listening, or change your message. It might be a warning that you are unintentionally escalating the situation. So we also want to look at this behavior in other people. If we see someone opening their eyes wide, they're surprised at what we just said. If they start to close their eyes to collect themselves, they may not be listening, or they may be telling you to change what you say, right? So pay attention to those cues from other people. In our voices, again, this is ourselves and the person who's escalating. A lowered voice might set a tone of anger, which could create fear or challenge. A raised voice might set a tone of anticipation or uncertainty, which might promote excitement or disruption. We want to speak slowly. This is usually interpreted as soothing. So we're looking to try to find what does soothing mean? Slow and even tone, right? Um, a controlled voice is one of calm and firmness. That promotes confidence. Be careful with humor. That could unintentionally offend someone and escalate the situation. But it also can be helpful if we use it sparingly. Always, always, always direct the humor towards yourself. But be careful when attempting humor in this type of situation. Please don't use that technique unless you really feel confident in it. Always be respectful to the other person. We can use phrases like please, thank you, right? When we are addressing somebody, depending on relationship with the person, using some simple techniques like Mr. is, right? Indicating respect. We want to show respect the whole time with this person, regardless of how they're behaving. We want to thank them, and we want, when we're asking for things, we want the words please, right? Inflection really, really matters, okay? So like, let's if we think about the neutral statement, I didn't say you were stupid, right? What do those words mean, right? But what if it's I didn't say you were stupid? That's no, I didn't say it, your brother did, right? I didn't say you were stupid, but I did write it down. Right? I didn't say you were stupid. I said this person's, that means, right? Or I didn't say you were stupid. I said you were a complete idiot, right? Those are the second phrases there are the ways those are interpreted. But when we put the inflection in different places in a sentence, it changes the meaning. So let's be really intentional with our inflection. Super important that safety comes first. Invasion or encroachment of personal space tends to heighten or escalate anxiety. Personal space is usually 1.5 to 3 feet, right? You want to say, I'm just going to be blunt about this one. You want to stay a leg's distance away, right? So that you cannot be hit or kicked. If this situation escalates, you want to keep your safety first, right? Don't touch a hostile person. They might interpret that as an aggressive act. But keep your hands visible at all times. You don't want the other person to misinterpret. Be at eye level if possible. Stay at the same height. Angle yourself at 45 degrees and keep a triangle with the, if there's 2 people or if there is a doorway, right? The agitating person needs to have an escape route that is not through your space. You also have to have an exit strategy. Right? Always face the person. There is less chance of aggressive behavior if 2 people are talking to 1 person. So if we can have 2 people de-escalating, as long as they aren't encroaching on personal space, talking over each other, and seeming agitated themselves, this can be a really effective way to maintain like something not getting to that next level, right? A lot less chance of aggressive. Okay. So we covered the nonverbal communication. What is the verbal communication, right? Disregard the content, right? We're going to focus on calming our words, the way that we're saying them, right? We're not going to interrupt, argue, persuade, or verbally defend yourself. It's not the time for that, right? We're going to respond selectively, right? Be really selective what you're responding to. We're mostly just listening. We're going to be real honest, but be careful what you choose to be honest about. Just make sure that what you do choose to say is not untrue, is not insincere. So make sure we are being honest. We want to empathize with feelings, not behavior, right? Don't analyze emotions in this situation. This is simply listening. Distracting the other person can be helpful. Refocusing them on something positive. Attempting to change the subject. Again, using sparing humor, maybe lighten the mood, but be very careful with this. And then empathizing with them, their feelings, again, not their behavior. We can give them choices and we can set limits. Okay. Listening skills, right? What are these, like, listen when this sounds silly, but like when you are listening, listen. No other activities. You are just listening. Multitasking is not good when you are listening. Don't interrupt, let them vent, right? So we want to attend when we are listening. Attending, following, and reflecting are those key listening skills. What does it mean? Attending, we are giving your physical and mental attention to the other person, fully and complete, right? We want to follow, right? So we want to be present the entire conversation, regardless of where it's going. We're engaged by using eye contact. We are using unintrusive gestures like nodding your head, saying okay, very infrequently, maybe asking a question. And when we do choose to speak back, we're going to reflect, we're going to paraphrase, we're going to use the feelings of the other person because we're reflecting those emotions. That is how we show empathy. So we want to make sure that we are doing that with intent. Okay. And then when we are using those verbal techniques, what does it actually sound like? Really sounds. Okay. Finding those right words. Okay, so we're going to bridge, right? One of the things we're going to do is bridge. That's active listening, empathy. That's a shift in energy. That's when we say things like, I hear you. That's when we acknowledge out loud to the person that we might be escalating. We can say things like, thank you. I hear your concern. Want to make sure we are saying without solution, knowing what you can and can't do, because we are not in a space right now when things are escalated to problems. We can offer resources, right? I've just shared a lot of information with you, right? Here's the information I can provide. I can follow up, right? Get them sort of off the hook where they don't have to digest or know or remember or understand everything that you have shared, right? We can also listen to their concerns, but use those positive, helpful statements to acknowledge those feelings and make sure that they know that you are listening to their concerns, right? Say something to help to ground them. Breathing, increasing circulation, decreasing cortisol, stress hormones. We can help, we can breathe with somebody, right? Help me understand what you need. Some people have trouble identifying how they feel about what's happening. They might be escalating. They might know that they're escalating. They might feel it. It might scare them. That might be making them escalate more. All of a sudden, they're panicking, right? So, like, help me understand what you need. Has this happened to you in the past? Tell me how I have this right. Tell me if I have this right. Do not say, tell me how. Probably don't. Okay. So we want to stay away from them. Okay. We can use empathetic boundaries. Remain calm, rational, professional. While you can't control the person's behavior, how you respond to their behavior can affect whether the situation escalates or diffuses. So this is what empathizing with feelings and not behavior looks like. We want to be empathetic and non-judgmental. Respect that personal space. Keep your tone neutral. Avoid overreacting. This is where we say things like, I understand that you are whatever that is, angry, upset, frustrated, but it is not okay to yell at the staff. We understand the feeling. The way it's showing up is outside of the guardrails of our boundaries, right? And we can put that in place. We're being empathetic. I know that this is hard. I know that you are angry. I understand how you feel. The manifestation of that is not, can't do this as a result of that. So we want to make sure we can do that, right? Allow time for decisions, right? What questions do you have for me, right? We want to ask open-ended questions whenever possible. So instead of something like, are you okay, right? We might say something like, can we talk? Maybe. It's better to say something like, would you like to sit down, right? So we're starting with like baby steps to a conversation, right? So, but those answers are you okay? No, I'm not. Can we talk? Maybe. Would you like to sit down? Yes, right? Instead, we're going to ask, what's going on? Tell me what you're upset about, right? So that's a very powerful technique, those open-ended. Okay. Let's bring it together, right? Key principles that can really help when we are de-escalating. Obtain the name of the person with whom you are speaking if you do not know it. People respond favorably to their own name. It also makes the conversation more personal. Let's ask for the person's name very early on and use it throughout the conversation. We're going to use active listening, clarifying, paraphrasing, open-ended questions that all help to ensure that the person is aware that you understand their frustration. This helps to lower frustration levels as they feel like they've gotten it off their chest and they've been heard. On a subconscious level, repeating a person's own words back to them clearly shows that your comprehension of their points on the most basic of levels, right? We want to slow down and suspend judgment. Empathy needs to be shown during conflict situations. Has to be, even if you do not agree with the person's position, expressing and understanding why that person feels a particular way will help resolve the conflict. Once again, ensure that you're giving the conflict your full attention. So respect for the other person's opinions and for their feelings. Next one is a really great technique. Get them to say yes. I know that sounds so basic, right? But it's really hard for somebody psychologically to stay angry with you if they're agreeing with you. And again, that sounds silly, but it is fundamental. So how do we achieve this? We use clarifying questions and provide summaries during the conversation that all help to confirm that you have understood their point. So this is where, we've asked those open-ended questions, but maybe we want to close some of those off to elicit a yes. When you use clarifying statements such as, so you're feeling frustrated because of this, is that right? You are creating a situation where the person must respond with a yes. The more often we can get the person to say yes, quicker the conflict may de-escalate. Extremely successful and useful technique. Using their name, getting them to say yes. These are all things that naturally have an impact. We want to avoid using cliches. I already mentioned it earlier, but don't say calm down, right? If you've ever said those words during a verbal conflict, you will realize that the normal response is, I am calm, at the top of their voice, most likely coupled with animated hand gestures, right? So, and they are not, in fact, calm, right? It's just totally ineffective. But any kind of cliche, we want to avoid that. It's minimizing, it's invalidating, it's all of those, right? And then we want to have consistency in courtesy. This is a personal favorite of mine. The person that you are dealing with at 10 o'clock at night deserves the same level of respect, courtesy, and patience as the person you are dealing with at 2 p.m. I really wanted to make sure to mention that and stress that, because we saw when we first got on here today and everyone was sharing, oh yes, I've had that experience. I've been frustrated in conversations. I've had the same conversations over and over again. We saw in the chat people saying things like, this is all day, every day. All of my clients. These are the kinds of responses I get day in, day out with all of the people that I deal with, right? So having consistency and courtesy is going to help. It's so hard because you are worn out. You are a human being as well, right? And that's a whole other webinar with self-care and compassion fatigue and burnout, right? But I get that, and I hear you, and I see that. But at the end of the day, these people are escalating, they don't know that it's your third argument today or your 10th argument today. And they deserve the same high level of service and professionalism as the very first person you spoke to today after your coffee when you were fresh and ready to take on the world, right? So we really have to remind ourselves and pull from those places that help us give that consistency. So these are some really helpful techniques that we can use. Okay, that really help that actually. There are some barriers. There are some barriers for us and for the other person. Barriers like prejudging. Sometimes we go into a situation Maybe it's somebody we have a lot of experience with. Maybe we have what I lovingly refer to as the curse of experience and knowledge. We kind of feel like we know what we're looking at. We've seen this person before. I say this person in air quotes, right? Because we feel like we've seen it all and we know what this formula is, and we've seen a million just like it, a million cases just like it, right? So we're going to prejudge because we get in that place where we think we know, because we have so much knowledge, because we have so much experience, that sometimes we forget each situation individually. That can be a barrier for us with our own implicit bias, right? Not listening can be a barrier, right? And we're assuming we know what they're going to say. It feels very predictable to us. It feels very turnkey. We know what we have to say next. So we really sort of check out. And we're focusing on our techniques, but we're not really listening. Criticizing, name calling, engaging in power struggles, right? And when we say something like engaging in power struggles, your first mental reaction to that is probably like, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. But human beings, just be mindful of it, because human beings are wired, right? That our response to fear is to gain control. When we get back in control, we are less afraid. So if these situations are unpredictable and you feel nervous or concerned in any way, you might default to some level of power struggle because your brain is wired that way. And I think that trained professionals have less of a risk, but not no risk. So we have to be careful about that. Giving orders, threatening, and threatening sounds again like something we think we wouldn't do, but anything like, talking about what the consequences of not calming down are going to be. You're gonna have to call somebody. I don't want you to get Baker acted here. I really don't want this to happen. I don't want to have to call the police. Those are all threats. So we've got to be careful about threatening. We also, in our effort to bring down the situation, we don't want to minimize what the person is feeling or experiencing. So validating and calming down is different than minimizing. And so we've got to be careful about where that line is. And then arguing, sometimes we can get sucked in. So just be mindful of that. We don't want to go back and forth, and we don't want to argue with, right? So now, ending de-escalation, right? So once the person has calmed down, you can then begin to address their individual situation by exploring the choices they have or what they would like to do next. This is where you might make a plan. You might get someone else to help. You might refer for additional support. Once they've calmed down, we go, okay, where do we go from here, right? Let's make a plan for what our next steps are going to be. Who can I get for you, right? Might be another thing, right? Maybe it's not you that needs to be part of those next steps, right? And then we might offer some of those resources, those referrals, give them some information about some additional or ongoing support after we have calmed down. Now we're back to where we can talk about what we're going to do. Right? When we've gone back that bell curve that I showed you before, when we're right across that bottom line again, now we can start having more collaborative conversations again. We can revisit, we can get back into that. Okay. Now, what if that doesn't happen? What if they don't get back in that place? Okay. Sometimes we have to terminate the interaction. No one ever wants to do that. Sometimes it's necessary. I would love to tell you that these techniques work 100% of the time and you're always going to meet with success. But then I would be lying to you, right? Do we know they work? Can they bring success in a variety of situations over and over again? Absolutely. Are there going to be cases where it's not going to work? Yes, also absolutely. So how do we terminate? A couple of things. We really need to make sure that we're not meeting resistance with resistance. We don't meet negative tones with negative tones. We don't meet reluctance with reluctance. We don't match it. We don't meet aggression with aggression, right? So here's where we can back off and say, I'm getting the sense that this is not the best time for this conversation. And then maybe we just make that decision and we say, is there another time that we can talk? Or would you like to speak with someone else instead of me, right? Now, we also, when we're terminating a conversation, be aware of trauma and triggers. We might not know what will bubble up for people, right? If through the context of work, the de-escalation isn't working, stop, right? You're not required to tolerate certain. You're not required to tolerate abuse, insults, racism, sexism, other harmful, violent behavior, right? If this is through your job, like you should not have to tolerate that in order to remain employed. I'm saying that to a couple of hundred people here. So, I hope that that doesn't come back and bite me, but there's no job that's going to pay you enough to be abused, right? And I feel like most supervisors are going to agree with that, right? So, sometimes if we have to terminate, that might mean stopping, reaching out to your supervisor, letting them know this isn't working. I had to terminate this interaction, right? No person, group, or set of conditions can ever guarantee that a conflict will proceed. So really paying attention to how that shows up and knowing that you do not have to tolerate is a really important thing. Okay. Now, leftover emotions, right? This is you. This is for you. You are going to have to self de-escalate after you have de-escalated. I'm talking to a room of largely caregivers and people who have these difficult conversations day in and day out. You are not immune, right? Again, this is a whole other webinar topic, but I got to include at least this slide here, right? You are not immune. You can expect to feel a certain kind of way. You can expect to have your own version, whatever that looks like, of being escalated after you have had to de-escalate, right? So what do you do with those leftover emotions that you are experiencing as this person who is having to go through these conversations day in and day out, right? In the moment, we need to have a plan of how we're going to handle that, the reactions that. So in the moment when we might be the one in charge of de-escalating and we are feeling ourselves escalate on the inside, like walking away before you blow up or say something you taking a deep breath, focusing on your greater purpose in the conversation, even having a personal like mantra, right? It's not about me, it's about them. It's not about me, it's about them, right? Like something that you can pull from to remind yourself. And that's that detachment that we talked about. Focusing on and remembering your role and your goals, right? In the moment, that can be really helpful. We want to prepare. We want to be intentional and realistic about the stress that you know that you will encounter. It's inevitable, right? So what can you do to prepare for the inevitable conflicts of your job, right? Honestly, eat, sleep, exercise. Do not let yourself get hangry. It's really hard to manage stressful times when you're too tired, and exercise and moving our bodies. We all know it. We don't always want to, right? It's the stuff we're hearing all the time. But in the jobs that you have, that most of the people on this call have, it is so critical to take care of yourself proactively so that you can show up as the subject matter expert and as the person that has the best chance of controlling and de-escalating these situations that you will inevitably face. And then in general, right? Like, how do we preserve ourselves? Have other interests. Make sure that so much of us are drawn to this type of work because of passion. We love it, we care about it, we want to make changes, and we're passionate, right? Got to have some other interests so that work doesn't become the end all be all, right? It'll help you be better at your job. And then things that we can do in general that help us de-escalate after the fact and that help with our like reactive self-care. We've had a bad day, we've had these experiences, we're full of leftover emotions like progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery, grounding the senses. There are tons of apps out there that have all kinds of exercises and techniques and things we can do to help calm down and help practice those self-care like meditations and body centeredness and all of those things. So find the ones that speak to you, the techniques of self-care that work for you, and know that your own de-escalation is very much a part of de-escalation techniques. Okay. There are some resources. I know that you guys get that PowerPoint, and you'll have access to that, so you'll be able to see those and review them yourself. And we have a little bit of time for questions at this point. If you've got anything to share, I know we had some audio problems, but go ahead and let me know. Oh wow, somebody shared something that I want to thank you for sharing that, right? So and again, my chat is jumping up and down, but let me see if I can get it. But somebody shared in the chat that they, you don't know how it's going to show up for you, right? That this person had gone to work the day after they had been assaulted and thought that they were okay, and then threw up at their desk. right? We tend to think we're okay because in our jobs we have to be, right? So like, no, fine, I can do the hard stuff. So that's thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful for us to see that that shows up in that profession. Okay. Thank you guys so much for the awesome feedback. I don't see any questions popping up there. Robert, did I miss any that might be questions? But I'm so grateful that you guys are giving me some feedback in there. I appreciate it.
I did just see one question that was kind of sandwiched in between the thank yous, and it said, "What do you recommend that somebody say as opposed to calm down? If calm down is not the thing to say, what would be?"
Yeah, and that's a great question because that didn't seem clear, I think, because there's not just like this easy replacement phrase, right? It's not instead of calm down, say this. It's honestly everything we talked about. It just take calm down out of it, right? We're not giving any directives. We're doing things like ORs. We're asking open-ended questions. We're reflecting. Probably a reflection is going to be where we would go instead of saying calm down, but the phrase calm down isn't really replaced with anything. It's just simply not used. And I hope I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. I do see a couple people that did say reflection of feelings and validation, like you said, Laura.
Yeah.
Um, Somebody said, "How do you level yourself when you are in the middle of a situation and you realize it is affecting you more than it should?"
Yes. Okay. So the first thing that I would offer to that, and I say this with love and compassion and empathy, stop using the word should. And I'll give you my little, when you're talking about yourself, because that is self-judgment, right? I'll give you my little play on words there, and hopefully you remember it and you smile and you reframe that the next time you say something like that to yourself. You got to stop shoulding on yourself and don't should on other people, right? It's a bad word. So hopefully you remember that when you hear yourself say that, right? Because who's to say it's affecting you more than it quote unquote should, right? You get to have feelings. You get to have your own traumas that show up. You get to have your own triggers. You're a whole entire human being, right? So how do we stop that, right? In the jobs that we do, some like pre-preparation, knowing ourselves, self-awareness, self-regulation, really learning your triggers, really knowing how you respond to things, what things are most difficult for you. That's all stuff, and what things are easier for you, right? That's all stuff we kind of have to do on the front end. And then when we feel that happening, right, we have to give ourselves permission to not be perfect at everything. So maybe the way one person, the boundary that causes one person to say, I need to terminate this interaction is in a different place than yours. Maybe once a person goes in a certain direction, that's going to impact you more than you incorrectly believe it quote unquote should, right? But I get that. I get what you're saying. You know, you feel like you a responsibility to do better, and you feel like that this is something that you have the expertise to navigate, and you're not navigating it. I understand what you're saying, but it might just mean the boundary's in a different place for you. That's okay. Everybody's boundary gets to be in a different place. The other thing that we can do is really learn some of those in the moment techniques. What do you respond to? Is it deep breathing? Is it something that's in your internal self-talk? Is it simply saying, let's take a break from this conversation? I don't know about you, but I feel like I might need to breathe first. I really care about the experience you're having, and I want to take a minute and just think, sit with me, and we right? So we're asking that, and that I like because the person might say yes. So we've kind of killed two birds there, right? And so we've gotten them to say yes. We've taken a pause in the conversation. We've honored our own experience, but we're not giving up on the person. And I'm sorry I just said giving up because terminating a conversation is not giving up. It is simply saying this is ineffective and I'm going to walk away from this right now instead of continuing to potentially make this worse, either for this person or for me. So I wish that we could talk about that more. And maybe, Robert, that's a good, we've had a lot of questions and feedback about the self-care piece. And we've had a lot about like, how do we put that proactive self-care? How do we do those things in the moment? Maybe that's a future webinar that we could do. I don't want to be presumptuous, but it seems like we are getting some feedback that would indicate that your population might want some of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer and for that feedback. Definitely going to keep that in mind. I think the only other question I've seen, Laura, is somebody said in the chat, what if you have a parent struggling with substance abuse and you've used these techniques with them, but they still think nothing will help them? It's almost as if their self-worth is non-existent.
Yeah. So motivational interviewing is something that can help people get to change, but it is not like a magic trick, right? So if you've identified, and it sounds like you have, and this is more of a general answer, me not knowing like what this person's particular role is in this case, right? But if you've identified that this is a self-worth issue, then working on that clinically, whether you're the clinician or whether you can refer to the clinician or whether you can really help them say like, hey, I'm hearing all of these things, we're talking about all of these things, and I really, you deserve to have more self-worth. Asking if they are willing to work on that be the referral. Identify that the self-worth is the barrier, work on that first. And we can maybe have some, right? Or that change talk and that motivational interviewing can be focused there, right? I'm hearing that you don't feel that the self-worth that you need to feel to even entertain me, right? Maybe that's where we can focus the things that we're saying. But it sounds like you're in a better position with that person than you think, only because you've identified what the barrier is. And so much of these conversations and working with people is just that, trying to identify what the barrier is. Once we know it, then we can try to really focus in on really overcoming that barrier, even if it's not all the way, just enough where we can let some other things really propel them.
Perfect. We've got time for a couple more. So, Laura, I see two more questions, and I'm going to take it over for some closing items. But we have one question that says, are there ever moments where motivational interviewing doesn't lead the client to change at all? Is there a timeline where the client starts thinking of change and taking steps?
I wish there was a timeline, right? That would be so nice because we can say we're going to do this for X amount of time, right? And then we're going to go on to this other thing. So are there cases where things don't work? Sure, right? There's a lot of evidence and a lot of science and a lot of support, a lot of research that supports these techniques. So you've got a really good chance of trying something like this and having it lead to some sort of change. Any trainings like this, we're showing you the textbook, right? We're showing you the ideal. You say this, you're going to get this kind of response. Out there in the real world, you could get that response. You could also get something different, right? Because we're dealing with living, breathing human beings. But we know that the likelihood of this working is pretty high. If you feel like you've been going at this a while, and no one ever likes this response, but it's true, check your technique. Check your own biases, make sure, and we covered that a little bit earlier, but that's where I would go first is, am I the problem, right? Unintentionally, of course, you're doing your best, right? And again, maybe there's a area, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm doing everything right in motivational interviewing and it's having like almost no effect, right? And that was kind of is connected to the last question we had. So maybe it's because there is a barrier to that person even being able to be responsive to something like motivation. And maybe focusing your efforts on what is that barrier here? Why is everything being shut down? Why are they not participating in collaborative conversations? Are we having an issue here where we're having some mental health struggles that are creating the barrier of like listening and participating and collaborating? Maybe those need to be addressed, right? If this is somebody in substance misuse, maybe I am picking the wrong times. Am I attempting, whether I know it or not, am I attempting to try to have these collaborative, thinking, thought-provoking conversations while the person is under the influence? or, like take a look at our timing, take a look at what else is happening and going on, take a look at whether or not we have some other barriers. But yes, at the end of the day, this is one technique, right? And luckily there's so many techniques out there, but this is the one today was about, right?
Thank you so much. And then the last question I'll ask is, what do you do if somebody doesn't want to talk to you? Like, I think the question here is if they just stonewall you and stop responding.
Yep, and that is a form of aggression. So the de-escalation for that might literally just be that I'm going to terminate that conversation. I mean, the sad reality is that people do, this whole technique is based around the fact that people get to make their own choices. And we go into these conversations and these professions believing in people that they can, but we also believe in their right to make that decision. The sad part of that is the shadow side. Will also have the right to choose not to get them. We never want to see that. We always want to offer them a path ahead, and we always want to try to say, this is what's available to you when you're ready. So some of that is trusting and believing that even though they have shut down, they have at least heard your effort, and letting them know that this can be revisited, that you are somebody who can help them, who is willing to help them, who has some expertise to help them. And when and if they ever choose to have this conversation again, you are open to it. And possibly even encouraging them, hey, maybe it's me you don't want to talk to. If there's someone else you're more comfortable with, encourage them to talk to that person, right? And then just remaining available and open. It's harder in the professional space because you have a job to do, and when they shut down, you're not able to do that job, right? And I get that. But from a human being standpoint, that's the
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. Really appreciate taking the time to answer those questions. I'm going to flip it over now to our conclusion PowerPoint. We have included Laura's contact information so that you may contact her with any further questions. I apologize if we didn't get to your question or if we missed it, but you can email Laura and she'd be happy to answer any questions that we missed. Laura, thank you for the time you put into this webinar and all the valuable information you presented for us. I see a lot of great feedback in the chat and we really appreciate it. Everyone, please note a couple of business items before we conclude today's webinar. First, I am posting links to the PowerPoint and the survey in the chat. I understand those will disappear very shortly. I will repost them momentarily. Additionally, when I end the webinar here in just a couple minutes, your web browser is going to populate a message that looks like this. It says the host or presenter would like WebEx meetings to open a website on your computer. This is not spam. This is WebEx trying to redirect you to the evaluation login. So click continue to be automatically redirected. You must sign into your account to complete the evaluation. If this is your first webinar with us and you do not have an account, you can register for one at no cost. You may do so by clicking haven't registered yet underneath the sign in menu. Please remember to use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in our system. This is the only way for us to connect your attendance at today's webinar with your evaluation completion. For CEs to be reported to CE Broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, please provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or update your license number, you may do so by logging in and clicking Edit on the Professional Information section of your profile. You will get a third opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. Please remember the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. For assistance with account login, account registration, or evaluation completion, fill out a contact us form on our website or email training@floridabha.org. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be posted to the professional development section of your profile in your FATA account within 30 business days. You must have attended the entire webinar and completed the evaluation for a statement of credit. We are not permitted to provide partial credit or CEUs. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again, Laura, for presenting for us today. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone, and please hold for the evaluation.